What if I told you that the largest crisis of the 20th century was also the most brutal and efficient mating market that has ever existed? What millions of men die in frozen trenches dreaming of returning home with their faithful girlfriend? Those same women were writing the crudest story of female desire. Brother, what you are going to hear in the next minutes will leave reality in half. Disclassified military documents, personal letters of soldiers, statistics that the government preferred to keep hidden for decades. Everything points to such a brutal truth that it rewrites everything you thought about knowing about love, loyalty, and the real nature of the female heart. If this is already moving something inside, I like it right now, because what I am going to tell you can revolutionize your life. We are not talking about theories. We are talking about historical facts that will make you see relationships with completely new eyes. We go together to discover why World War II not only changed the world, but revealed the most primitive and calculators who govern human desire. It is 1942. The world burns. For millions of young Americans, British and Canadians, life had been reduced to a terrifying binary, fighting to survive or dream of the home. They are crouched in frozen trenches in the Ardennes, their breath tarnishing the air, the fingers numb in the triggers of their rifles, scrutinizing empty skies about the Pacific, their ears attentive to the buzzing of engines that could mean death. His world is mud, metal, and a penetrating and overwhelming fear. But in their minds, they carry a talisman, a psychological anchor against the storm. They load her memory, the girl at home, his face in a hidden photograph next to his heart, the aroma of its perfume in a letter, a fragile ghost of a world that now seems impossibly distant. She is her reason. For her, she is fighting. I imagine working with a rivet gun in a factory, the hair collected backwards, doing its part. Imagine writing cards, faithful, waiting, his love, a constant star in his world off. This narrative of the faithful bride holding the domestic front is the cornerstone of romantic war mythology. It is a story that we tell ourselves to make the sacrifice noble, to give horror a softer meaning than steel and blood. But the story, when examined without sentimentality, tells something different, a darker story. It reveals that for an impressive number of women, the greatest romantic opportunity of their lives did not come in the peaceful stillness of a dance hall, but in the roar and apocalyptic wave of the total war. To understand the phenomenon, we must first define our term not with modern political background, but with clinical biological precision. Hypergamy, of the Greek hyper, about, and gamos, marriage. It is the instinctive impulse to form a couple bond with an equal or critically superior status partner. This is not a moral failure. It is not a social construction. It is an evolutionary imperative carved along millennia to ensure the survival and social ascent of offspring in a stable society. This impulse operates within certain restrictions: social class, geographical proximity, family expectations. It is a slow and boiling current. But put that same imperative in the melting of a global crisis, an environment where all normal social structures have been vaporized, where death is daily visitor, and where a huge concentrated population of high-status men appears suddenly, and that slow current becomes tsunami. World War II did not create female hypergamy. He simply removed all the cages, gave him a jetpack, and handed him a map. The domestic front was not a patient waiting place. For many, it was a frantic market, desperate and ultimately opportunistic. Consider the environment. With the mass mobilization of men, women were pushed into mass workforce. They earned their own money, obtained unprecedented independence, and experienced a social liberation that would have been unthinkable a decade earlier. But this freshly discovered freedom existed in a male attention vacuum. The local dating pool, the farm boys, the bank employees, the garage mechanics had gone, sent far away, replaced by a palpable and painful absence. This created deep anxiety, a fear of being left behind, to lose the opportunity in its best reproductive years. Now, add to that anxiety the arrival of a new type of man. Not the local boys with whom they grew, but strangers, soldiers, aviators, commands. These men are not a band defined by its social position prior to war. The war had erased that. They were defined by their uniforms, by their perceived heroism, by the raw, lethal competition they represented. A Texas sergeant who could have been a rural worker in 1941 now possessed a glamour, a status and tangible power that overshadowed any local boy who had been left behind. It was a nylon stock supplier, chocolate, scarce luxury goods. But more than that, it was a survival provider in the psychological sense. Align with him was to bet on the future, to the winning side. It represented a passage from a small town, an opportunity for a more exciting and safe life than the one I knew. This was the perfect hypergamic storm. The data is cold, brutal, and irrefutable. Let's go beyond the theory and enter the archives. The test is in the paper trail. The historian Don Campbell, in his pioneer work, Women at War with America, dissected the shocking statistics. In the United States, marriage rates shot during the war, far exceeding the projections prior to the conflict. But this was not a uniform phenomenon. The rate of marriages between women and men who enlisted to serve exploded. It was a career motivated by panic to ensure a link before the uncertainty of the game. But the most revealing data comes from what happened after the war with the so-called war girlfriends. The U.S. government approved the War Girlfriend Law of 1945 and, later, the Foreign Boyfriends Law to facilitate the immigration of spouses and promised of American military. The numbers are alarming. More than 100,000 women alone from the United Kingdom immigrated as war girlfriends to be with their American husbands. Tens of thousands came from Australia, New Zealand, and the entire liberated Europe, Italy, France, Germany. This was not a drip. It was a massive migration of women, a literal vote with their feet at a global scale, choosing the American winner over his own compatriots. The British government, alarmed by the exodus of its young women, conducted internal studies, worrying about the loss of its female population against rich and glamorous Americans. His own documents reveal a deep anxiety about the imbalance of economic and social power. The GIS were perceived as better suppliers, with their nation indicated by the ravages of war, offering a land of abundance compared to the Great Britain of ration books. This was hypergamy on civilization scale. Now let's get out of the macro level to the micro. Let's know people behind the numbers. And this is where history becomes painfully human, and where the gloomy reality enters a sharp and puncture focus. The National Archives are full of soldiers who returned home to find their world destroyed not by bombs, but by betrayal. These are not dry historical documents. They are screams of anguish trapped in ink, frozen over time. Consider the case of Soldier James Miller of Ohio. His letters to his institute's girlfriend, Mary, are a chronicle of devotion. He sends his pay home. Talk about the small house they will build. Draw images of the porch swing on the margins. The hell of the Battle of the Ardennes survives. His body intact, but his marked mind. He takes her photography, cracked and discolored, through all that. He is discharged in 1945, a hero in the eyes of the nation. He makes the long train trip home, his heart beating hard with the hope that he kept him alive for 3 years. He arrives at his door, flowers in hand. She opens the door. It is not alone. There is a man in uniform of the army officer stopped behind her, her hand possessively on her shoulder. She looks at James, not with joy, but with sorrow and shame. Presence man. He is a bomber pilot who met in a dance use in Cleveland a year earlier. They married last month. Everyone in James, the mental construction that allowed him to endure indescribable horror, evaporates at that time. The government for which he fought considers him a hero. The woman she fought considers him a relic. His status as a humble satin of infantry was eclipsed by the superior status of an officer, a pilot, a golden boy. His trauma, his sacrifice, mean nothing in the new hypergamic calculation. Its history was repeated with small variations hundreds of thousands of times. Or look at the even more shocking phenomenon of the letter, Dear Juan. This was not just a break. It was a specific and brutal communication way. A termination notice delivered to a man in combat zone. Imagine the scene. An email call in an advanced base on some forgotten island of the Pacific. Men agglomerate luck. The only moment of joy in a week of horror. A lieutenant deliver the precious envelopes. A soldier, let's call him Cabo Evans, receives his letter. Recognize the calligraphy of your fiancé. La Tranga, a smile on his dirty face. Start reading. The smile hesitates. The color disappears from his face. The letter is not full of love and nostalgia. It is a clinical and cold document. He explains that he met someone else, someone who is in the United States, someone whose future is not at risk. He feels it, but he needs to be practiced. Wait for you to understand. The paper falls from your fingers. The men around them remain silent. They know. They have already seen it before. The military command recognized the devastating impact that these letters had on the morals and effectiveness of combat. Some units even had officers who pre-proclaimed the mail and retained the letters, "Dear Juan," until after a mission, fearing that a demoralized soldier would become a careless soldier, a danger to himself and his companions. The war machine was literally sabotaged by the inexorable operation of female hypergamy. The needs of the heart were above the needs of the nation. This behavior was rational. From a purely Darwinian perspective, it was brilliant. The woman who linked with the man of highest status available, the one with the best apparent opportunity of survival and provision, was making the optimal choice for her genetic legacy. The pilot, the officer, the technician with a safe position. Those were the awards. Infantry soldiers in the trenches, the sailor in a destroyer in submarine-infested waters. Those were bad bets. His mortality rates were scalpelatingly high. Waiting for them was risking everything. The crisis worked as a filter, forcing women to make brutally efficient decisions. This is the heart of the truth of the black pill. Sentimentism and attachment to the past are luxuries that cannot survive a genuine crisis. Loyalty is conditional. Love is contingent. It depends on the man's ability to maintain and project status and security, especially when the world is falling apart. The soldier who left as the Institute's boyfriend returned to discover that the criteria had changed. It could have been a hero, but was it a supplier? Did he have perspectives? Or was it broken, traumatized, competing against men who had gained status and raw wealth during the war, not just risked their lives? The battlefield did not end in Europe or the Pacific. He continued on the domestic front, a silent social battlefield where weapons were charm, status, and security promise, and the casualties were the hearts of men who had already given everything. This is not an accusation to women. It is an accusation to a fairy tale narrative that has been sold to men by generations. The story of the faithful Penelope weaving her shroud while waiting for decades for the return of Odysseus of war is a myth. It is a story that men tell themselves to make the inherent risk of the commitment seem safe. World War II exposes this myth in the toughest possible light. It shows us the raw engine and unal raging of human mating strategies. For modern man, this is not reason for despair. It is reason to wake up. It is the definitive red pill. Understanding that this impulse exists, which is essential and powerful, is the first step to navigate it successfully. It means understanding that your value is not intrinsic. It is built, maintained, and demonstrated. It means knowing that in peace times, the hypergamy operation is slower, more subtle, but no less real. The man who believes that love is unconditional is a man living in borrowed time. A man who will be taken by surprise when a personal crisis, a loss of work, a disease, a depression temporarily decreases his status and reveals the true nature of the ties he thought were unwavering. The lessons of war girlfriends are not confined to history books. They are being developed in each appointment application, in each divorce cut, in each relationship where a man believes that his past actions are sufficient to guarantee future fidelity. We have seen the configuration, the perfect storm. We have seen the cold and hard data of massive female migration. We have felt the visceral pain and heartbreaking of individual soldiers betrayed by the same paradigm that we're dying to protect. But this is just the beginning. This is only the general contour of the phenomenon. Because to truly understand the depth of this, we must travel to the very epicenter of the crisis. We must go to the conquered nations, to the ruins of Germany and Japan. Because it was here, in the sea absolute ranches of defeat, where the entire social order collapsed, where survival was a daily struggle, that female hypergamy demonstrated its most implacable, more shocking and more brilliantly strategic form. The silence that fell on Europe and the Pacific in 1945 was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of the grave, of exhaustion, of total ruin. For the victors, it was a tired triumph time, slow demobilization, and the long trip back home. But for the defeated, it was the beginning of a new and, in many ways, more terrifying fight. The struggle for survival in a world that had been systematically dismantled. The cities were reduced to silhouettes cut against the sky. drawn landscapes where the death and decomposition stench persisted for years. There was no food, there was no fuel, there was no law. The social contract, that fragile agreement that keeps civilization together, had been destroyed. In this absolute zero of human existence, where any claim of morality and culture had been eliminated, only the most primitive instincts remained. And it is here, in the absolute heart of darkness, that we witness the most implacable and philosophically devastating expression of female hypergamy. This is not the story of choosing a beautiful American pilot about a local boy. This is the story of what happens when the choice is between allying with the man who burned your city to the foundations, or seeing your child starving in your arms. To understand the landscape, one must first understand the entire defeat. In Germany, the concept of 0 hour was born. It was the recognition that the clock had been restarted, that everything before was irrelevant, and that life would now be measured in calories, cigarettes, and pieces of coal. The occupation forces, American, British, French, and Soviet, were not mere soldiers. They were gods. They controlled everything. They possessed the only viable currency: food, medicine, chocolate, nylon socks, and the overwhelming power of life and death. A single American soldier feeding a German child with a can of ration C was a more powerful power symbol than any tank. In Japan, devastation was even more complete. The atomic bombs had vaporized 2 cities, but the conventional bombardment had incinerated more dozens. The divine emperor, a living god for centuries, had been forced to give up his divinity. The Japanese people were not merely defeated, they were spiritually annihilated, drifting in a cosmos that had been fundamental and violently broken. In this psychic and physical vacuum, the American occupant, the gaijin, the barbarian, who now had the keys of existence itself, emerged. It is in this context that the most shocking and strategically bright hypergamic maneuvers were developed. The women of the defeated nations, particularly Germany and Japan, faced such a brutal calculation that makes the letters Dear Juan seem sentimental. His men were dead, listed or languishing in refugee fields, returning broken and emascular, often unable to talk about his trauma. His status had been reduced to less than 0 by the simple fact of his defeat. Being a German man in 1945 was to be a couple, a symbol of failure and a monstrous ideology. Being a Japanese man was being the incarnation of a failed divine mandate. They could not provide, they could not protect. They only offered shared hunger and a legacy of shame. And then the victors arrived, the Americans. They were healthy, well-fed, confident, and endowed with an apparently backless abundance. They represented the ultimate evolutionary award, survival itself. A line with them was not a matter of social assent. It was a matter of biological imperative. It was hypergamy stripped of all romance, of all claim, all artifice. It was a raw Darwinian transaction. The term for these relationships was hygienized by history, fraternization. But this clinical word hides a universe of despair, calculation, and survival. The Allied command initially prohibited the fellowship with the German population. It was seen as a risk of security and a moral failure. But the order was completely inapplicable. It was like prohibiting the tide rising. The attraction was not merely romantic, it was gravitational. The American soldier, often lonely and far from home, was looking for a company. The German Fräulein was looking for salvation. A famous and obsessive photograph of the time captures this dynamic perfectly. A beautiful German girl, her perfectly combed hair, walking through the rubble of her city. He is smiling, laughing, from the arm of a handsome American soldier. In the background, a group of taciturn and sunken German men looks at them. The look at his faces is not angry, but of deep and existential defeat. They lost the war, they lost their city, and now they are seeing the women of their nation choose the enemy. The woman is not a traitor. It is pragmatic. He made the only rational choice available to her in an irrational world. His smile is not of joy, but of relief. He has assured a pattern in the New World Order. The phenomenon in Japan was even more complex and culturally devastating. The Pan girls became a tragic and omnipresent figure of the occupation. They were Japanese young, many times from good families, who had been completely impoverished by war, who asked American soldiers food or simple protection. It is believed that the term itself is onomatopoeic. the sound of one hand hitting another in a transaction. But reducing this to simple prostitution is losing the deep hypergamic strategy at stake. For many of these women, the goal was not a single meal or a pair of stockings. The objective was a permanent link. The goal was to become a war girlfriend. They were participating in the riskiest audition of their lives, using the only currency they had to attract the attention of a high-status supplier. The most successful of them were not seen as prostitutes. They looked as strategists navigating the ruins of their old world to ensure a place in the new one. They learned English. They adopted American ways. They offered not only sex, but the illusion of domesticity and companionship in a foreign and hostile land. For a lonely soldier, this was a powerful lure. The relationship between a Pan girl and her GI was a microcosm of the entire occupation, a transaction of power where resources and security were exchanged for companionship and an appearance of normality. Children born from these unions, the so-called occupation babies, are the living testimony of this brutal period. In Germany, they were called Mischlingskinder, or more crudely, Besatzungskinder, occupation children. Their lives were often incredibly difficult, trapped between two worlds, not belonging to any. They were living in respirators of national humiliation and personal trauma. But its mere existence is proof of the success of the strategy. Their mothers, by ensuring a genetic bond with the winner, guaranteed that his offspring the passport of the winning tribe. This is hypergamy operating at its most fundamental genetic level. It's not about emotion. It is the cold and hard calculation of genetic legacy and acquisition of resources. The mother could have faced ostracism, but her son could have the opportunity to live in America, the land of abundance, far from the hungry ghosts of Europe. This was a long-term investment against absolute catastrophe in the short term. The case of Japan offers one of the most shocking examples of this calculated choice. The story of Hiroko, a young woman from an ancient aristocratic family in Tokyo, is archetypal. The house and wealth of his family were vaporized in the bombings. His father, a proud imperial officer, committed seppuku when he heard the emperor's surrender speech, unable to live in a world where his entire belief system had collapsed. Hiroko, his mother and younger sister were helpless, living in a hut and fighting for food. The arrival of the Americans was initially received with terror, but terror soon gave way to terrifying pragmatism. Hiroko watched other women from his neighborhood start associating with GIS. They returned with food, medicine, and, more importantly, a sense of security. One day, a young American officer, lost, asked for addresses. She talked a little English. He was educated, handsome, and clearly powerful. He made a choice at that time that it would have been unthinkable 2 years before. He did not see the enemy. He saw a supplier. He cultivated the relationship with the strategic precision of a general. He learned to make apple cake with ration ingredients K. Heard his stories. He offered a refuge for the stress of occupational duty. Within a year, he had married him and was on his way to a new life in California. He left behind his past, his culture, his mother and sister. Was this betrayal? Or was it the ultimate act of family loyalty, stirring as a mouth to feed and potentially creating a lifeguard for your family later? This is the impossible moral calculation of crisis hypergamy. There is no correct answer. There is only survival and the relentless impulse to ensure the best possible result for oneself and its genetic line. This behavior is not a historical aberration. It is the default configuration of human nature when the civilization varnish is scraped. Lessons for modern men are not tried to blame women for being pragmatic. The lesson SE tries to understand the true nature of the game. The philosophy of the black pill is, in its nucleus, a philosophy of radical acceptance of reality devoid of sentimentality. The phenomenon of war girlfriends is the definitive black pill. It demonstrates clearly that the value of a man is contingent and contextual. The same German soldier who was a hero in 1941 was a couple in 1945. His inherent qualities had not changed. His courage, his loyalty, his love for his country remained intact. But his status had been completely invested. The inherent qualities of the American soldier were largely irrelevant. His status as winner and supplier was everything. For modern man, this translates into a simple and implacable truth. Your past acts are irrelevant. Your promises make no sense. Your inherent goodness has no value. Your value is determined by your current ability to provide, protect and project power and security in the here and now. The man who loses his job and falls into depression cannot appeal to the love he once shared with his partner. It is, at that time, a defeated soldier returning home that went ahead. The man who fails to maintain his physical strength, his mental strength, and his mission in life is a man inviting a slow and silent, dear and silent letter. The world may not be literally ruined around us, but the social and economic landscape is perpetually unstable. The crisis is always stalking. A market collapse, a personal disease, a social seizure. At that time, the same primitive instincts that guided war girlfriends will go to the surface. They are always there, bubbling under the surface, hoping that the pressure falls enough to erupt. The very highly dark conclusion of this whole saga is not of despair, but of empowerment through clarity. The man who understands these forces is no longer a slave to a fairy tale. It is a strategist. He knows that his work never ends. His mission is eternal. You must always be building, maintaining, and increasing your status, resources, and strength. He does this not for a woman, but for himself. Its value is your own creation, your own strength. A woman can share that strength, but she is not the reason for her construction. War girlfriends, from English girls to the German Fräulein and Japanese pan-pan girls, were not evil. They were rational actors in an irrational situation. They were playing the oldest game on earth with implacable efficiency that inspires some severe respect. They teach us that in the theater of human relations, there is no place for spectators. There are only actors and those who are acted. The choice for a man is simple. Build an impregnable strength of your own value. Become the winner in your own life, and understand the dark primary currents that guide the human choice, or risk becoming the man stopped in the ruins, silently observing the world move on without you. A ghost of a forgotten war, wondering what did wrong. The war ended, but the lessons are eternal. The mating market never sleeps. Hypergamy never rests. And the man who forgets this does it at his own risk, because deep down, brother, we are all at war. War for resources, by status, or genetic survival. The question is not if you are going to fight. The question is if you are going to win. And there you have it, brother. The raw truth that you will ever hear about female nature. It is not a theory. It is not an opinion. They are documented historical facts that destroy the romantic fantasy that they sold you since childhood. Do you feel that weight in the chest? That feeling that something broke inside you while listening? Perfect. It means you are waking up. It means that the scalpel of reality has just cut the chains of the illusion that they had chained to you. But here comes the brutal. Now that you know this, you cannot pretend that it did not happen. You cannot live again in ignorance. You are responsible for acting with this information or becoming another victim of the system. The man who listens to this and does not change anything in his life is choosing mediocrity. He is choosing to be the German soldier looking from the ruins while another takes what he thought was his. Listen to what whispers within you right now. Are you going to continue being a spectator of your own life? Or are you going to build something that no one can snatch you? If this video left reality as it happened to me when I discovered these documents, he says, I command without saying anything. It is the password of those who understood. Because in 7 days I return with something that will make this video look like a children's game.